felt neglected by the British who were ruling them, even though they themselves are of British stock. They felt that the focus of the British was on Europe, and they wanted to focus on their own lives in the American continent. So for that reason, they followed this policy where they stayed away from the continent. In fact, I mean, all the way back in the 20th century, the League of Nations was founded at the end of the First World War as a forerunner of the United Nations. And the biggest advocates of an international organization bringing all the countries together was the then American President Woodrow Wilson. And yet his own Senate refused to ratify the treaty. In America, all treaties have been ratified by the Senate. And therefore many people never joined the League of Nations because they preferred a policy of isolation. It only ended with the Second World War and with their engagements, and they felt that now that they've expended so many lives and so much treasure in changing the map of the world, that they had a vested interest in protecting it. That's when they became seriously a superpower in terms of engaging with the rest of the world. We'll come to America in the afternoon, but that is the experience of the US at that time. Having said that, if you look back on Latin America, the second part of your question, the Latin American area, they saw very much as their own backyard. So they would not have applied the isolationist principle to Latin America. In fact, on the contrary, they wanted others not to interfere, only them to interfere. The very expression banana republic comes from the American fruit companies. In particular, there's a big multinational called the United Fruit Company, who used to grow bananas in Latin America and ship them to America. And of course, they wanted governments that were sympathetic to them and to their policies, and very often it was said that they used to buy these governments with the proceeds of their bananas. These governments were called banana republics because their decisions were being made by the banana company. That was the expression. Now, coming back to where we were.
Can I interrupt you?
Sure.
Sir, I mean,
I think I drank your water by mistake. Sorry, good.
So what's happening is, there's a slight dichotomy in my mind, in the sense that on one side we're saying that everyone, which is like-minded people looking for their independence, so we are making the map, which we probably had earlier, more complicated by, making the boundaries more bold and more territories being seen. On the contrary, today what we're talking about, I'm not just Indian, I'm rather an Asian or probably a global citizen, so the boundaries are getting diminished. So, there's a lot of dichotomy.
Exactly what I'm
saying. That on the one side is the political side which defines the humanity, or say businesses, which decides that what is the geography.
Very good question, and that's exactly where I was heading. Remember, I began this part of my conversation with you by saying that one of the characteristics of the world today is change. And I'll come back to this, and that was my third point, as it were. But just to finish on change, I was describing how these countries had come into existence after the Second World War. One of the major things that happened at the end of the Second World War was the emergence of the Soviet Union, which was one of the victorious powers of the Second World War. The Second World War was won by an alliance of the Western democracies and the Soviet Union, along with their colleagues and supporters over Germany and Japan. So the paradox was that you had the West winning, but also the people who were going to become their biggest ideological enemies, the communists, by virtue of their victory, expanded their reach beyond the Soviet Union to all the countries of Eastern Europe, which they had conquered in the course of the war. And they were able to establish communist regimes in those countries. So from 1945 to about 1990, 45 years, these countries were being controlled by tight-run communist dictatorships. And as I said, many of us saw the world as immutable. That you have these two blocks, one the Soviet bloc, Moscow, which itself included 17 different so-called republics within the Union of the Soviet Socialist Republics, USSR, and another 20-odd East European countries which were under Moscow's control on the one hand, and then the Western democracies on the other, and countries like us trying to steer a course of what we call non-alignment. Non-alignment is not neutrality. It's important to understand the difference. There were a couple of countries in the world that were neutral by policy and often by constitution. The most famous of which is which one? Switzerland. Excellent. Switzerland. Name me two more in Europe that were neutral during this period. One was Austria. Austria lost their sovereignty when the Germans under Hitler marched into Austria. before the Second World War began and took it over. After the Second World War, Austria was under the control of all the victorious allies, including the Soviets, till 1955. And the Soviets only left, and the West only left, when they were able to agree on the creation of a constitution, which they called the State Treaty, which by law obliged Austria to be neutral in the dispute between the West and the East, between the Soviet Union and the Western world. And you know who was the principal architect of this treaty? None other than our own Jawaharlal Nehru.
The three ends that shaped the world.
I'm sorry?
The three ends that shaped the world.
Nehru?
Nikita and Nasser.
No, it was Nehru, Nasser, and Nkrumah who was the Ghanaian thing. But that's a totally contentious argument after that second. The other two were not so much involved in the state treaty exercise. It was Nehru as an influential figure who tried to come up with a formula to keep them neutral. And the third country that was neutral by law was Finland. It was on the borders of the Soviet Union, but it was western by temperament, and had also been conquered by the Soviets in 1941. During the Second World War, the Soviets had marched and taken over Finland, but the Western countries said Finland cannot be treated like the Eastern European countries. It is actually a Western country, and they worked out a deal where Finland was neutral. So there were these three neutral countries. Neutral countries meant they could not take any position on any disputes involving the two. They were completely and totally neutral. Okay? The joke was that these countries were so neutral they didn't even interfere in their own internal affairs. Whereas non-alignment was a bit different. Non-alignment was that we are not full-time attached to one side or the other. That we are free to choose for ourselves those areas in which we agree with one side and those areas where we agree with the other. There's a joke which is almost certainly apocryphal about Nehruji and Eisenhower's secretary. Eisenhower was the president of the United States, his secretary of state, a man called John Foster Dulles in the 1950s, had once famously declared that non-alignment between good and evil is itself evil. Okay, so he is alleged to have said to Nehruji, in a phrase that many of you have heard more recently from a later American president, "Are you with us or against us?" And Nehruji replied, "Yes." We are with you or against you, depending on the issue. We are with you when we agree with you, we are against you. So that was the Indian approach. And I'm going to come to India separately in India's role in world affairs, but I mentioned this to say that non-alignment became a very important tool, particularly for developing countries that used to be colonies and had felt that they didn't have the freedom to make their own choices because there were these colonial powers telling them what to do. And so the most important characteristic very often non-alignment was a stubborn determination that others would not dictate to them. And that's where your three ends come in. Nkrumah was the first leader of Ghana, Nasser, the first leader of Egypt, and Nehru, of course, in India. Equally, there was Tito from Yugoslavia and Sukarno from Indonesia. And these five big leaders, who are leaders of substantial countries that didn't want to be aligned to one side or the other, became the leaders of the non-aligned movement. And the two big events that crystallized the non-aligned movement were first what was called the Afro-Asian Conference in the hill station of Bandung in Indonesia in 1955, which is where the first time when they all came together and created what became known as the non-aligned movement. The word was not used yet, it was coming. The man who's credited with using that name is actually Krishna Menon, who was an advisor to Nehru, the leader of the Indian delegation to the UN, and later as Minister of the portfolio de facto doing foreign affairs for Nehru. Bandung in 1955, and the second big summit was in a place called Brioni, which is the island of Yugoslav coast, in 1961. And during that period, they exercised a tremendous influence in the world, including out of proportion to their strength. None of them had a particularly strong army or the capacity to determine world affairs by themselves. But by coming together and saying, you will not dictate to us, they had to be paid attention to by the superpowers. And during an era of Cold War conflict, it became extremely useful to have a means of navigating between the two, and frankly, sometimes winning favors from both. Both superpowers were anxious to court these developing countries. And the developing countries could therefore get economic assistance or political backing when necessary, development aid and so on, from these big countries. And so non-alignment turned out to be also a shrewd and practical tool that you maximize your sources of support. That was an extremely crucial aspect. Now you should understand there is a difference between the non-alignment, which is politically non-aligned, therefore is a political representation of the countries of the developing world. And what became known as the G77, which is the economic grouping of the countries of the developing world. They're called the G77 because initially there were 77 of them in the UN. Today there are more than 100. And what they did was, they came together to advocate a common point of view on international economic relations, in which capacity they were very often anti-Western, because they saw, perhaps wrongly, we can talk about that separately, they saw Western imperialism in the economic sense as the biggest threat to themselves, and they fought for a new international economic order that would give them more control over their own business. And therefore, the Soviet Union and others supported the developing countries because it was a way of getting at the Western world. But in the non-aligned, you would find that whereas there was sometimes a bit of sympathy for the communist countries because the communist countries were anti-colonial and anti-Western countries for retaining colonies, there were many non-aligned countries said our natural allies, quote unquote. It's a contradiction. A non-aligned country can't have an ally, but nonetheless, a natural ally of the Soviet Union. Many in the Western world, in turn, saw the non-aligned movement as really not truly non-aligned enough. And politically, that became an issue. At one point, we had countries like Cuba and Vietnam, which were in practice very closely allied with Moscow, were admitted into the non-aligned movement. It did affect the credibility of the non-aligned movement in many Western capitals. Now, this is broadly speaking I haven't yet come to your question because I want to finish the story first. This is broadly speaking how the world looked in 1990. Two superpower blocks and a non-aligned movement. The Soviet Union's collapse, completely unexpected to many, was a result of a number of factors, of which two are worth mentioning. The first was the increasing weakness of the Soviet economy, particularly in the face of a significant growth, not only in the Western economy, but in Western military spending. Particularly Ronald Reagan in the US started reaching for the stars, literally the so-called Star Wars program, creating missile defense shields and so on. And the Russians, because the communist system is an economically inefficient system, were simply not able to cope. And the strains on their economy became unsustainable. There were long lines, even in Moscow, for bread, and shoes, and newspapers, and so on. It became domestically unsustainable. But the second major factor was the increasing yearning of people under Soviet rule for their freedom. One of the things that you will discover as you look at the global political environment, and we will come to talking about Egypt and Tunisia and all of that, is that ultimately one of the most significant forces for change is the yearning of ordinary human beings to be free. And to be free in very simple ways: the right to travel, the right to go where you want, do the kind of job you want to do, marry who you want to be, and so on, which was very often not available to people in their system. And at the same time, economic failure, compounded by political failures, created increasing difficulties in all the Soviet ex-Soviet countries. The first and most important being East Germany, because when Germany was defeated at the end of the Second World War, the Soviets controlled half of it, called East Germany, or they called it the German Democratic Republic. In those days, whenever you saw the word democratic in the country's title, you could be certain it was not democratic. And the Western part controlled West Germany. But East Germany, which was still relatively sophisticated, heirs of the great German civilization, began to be the first to make this one. And the wall the Soviets had constructed, the Berlin Wall, which had stood for almost 3 decades, preventing East Germans from fleeing into the West, that wall became a symbol of everything that was wrong with the Soviet Empire. Then there was one more factor, the difficult to explain human factor in international relations. A man called Mikhail Gorbachev